Quiet, please.
All right, back on the record in the Simpson matter. Mr. Simpson is again present before the court with his counsel, Mr. Shapiro, Mr. Cochran, Mr. Douglas, Mr. Bailey. People represented by Ms. Clark, Mr. Darden, and Ms. Lewis. Good morning, counsel. All right, anything we need to take up before we invite the jurors to rejoin us? Mr. Cochran, Ms. Lewis. Morning, counsel.
Good morning, Your Honor. Just briefly, Your Honor, yesterday I filed on behalf of the people, a motion to compel discovery of experts' reports and notes and so forth, which this court's minute order, or I should say written ruling of January 29th, had ordered the defense to disclose immediately. I understand that that was short notice. However, because these are materials which were previously ordered by this court to be disclosed, I don't think the normal 10-day period is appropriate. So what is the court's pleasure in terms of when we should calendar this?
All right, Mr. Douglas, when do you think you'll be available to or able to address this matter?
Your Honor, the motion was faxed to Dean Ullman yesterday. He asked that he be given until Tuesday to respond. I'd asked to have the matter heard on Wednesday, which is less than the 10 days notice. I do not think that the materials under this motion are part of the court's earlier discovery order. I think, as the court will recall, we mentioned this particular problem and the need to resolve it, and so now is a good time as any, I think.
All right, Ms. Lewis, are you going to be available Wednesday?
Certainly, Your Honor.
All right, Wednesday, 9 a.m. Thank you, counsel.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Clark, anything else before we invite the jurors to join us?
I'm sorry. Just before any videotapes are shown to Detective Lange, we want an opportunity to be heard outside the presence of the jury. So when we get to that point, I appreciate if counsel would let us know.
All right.
If you want to get this one part, I don't have all of it yet, and I will do that regarding anything else that we receive. But Mr. Harris can show the court this one part. It's very, very quick.
All right, do you anticipate using that this morning?
No, Your Honor. There's so much. I doubt it, but I'd like you to look at it. It's going to take 2 minutes. Can Detective Lange step out here?
Sure.
I doubt it, Mr. Warren, but I'd like you to just look at it.
All right. All right, Mr. Harris, good morning. Do you want to run this for us, please? Are there any victims? All right. All right. Ms. Clark, do you have any objection?
That's it for now, Ms. Clark. And if there's others that come up, I'll let you know before I wrap up.
Any objection?
No.
All right. Thank you. All right. Anything else? All right. I'd like to speak to counsel at the sidebar without the report, please. Clark.
We had addressed some issues at the scene at Bundy, and you had shared with us, I believe, that it was your opinion that Mr. Cole Brown Simpson's body was in full rigor mortis. Is that correct?
Yes.
And, of course, you never touched the body, did you?
No, I did not.
And how did you make that determination of your own independent knowledge that she was in full rigor without touching the body?
By observing the coroner investigator examine the body.
And so you stood there and watched them, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, in that connection, you've shared with us that part of your regulations and part of the LAPD manual would prohibit an officer from touching the body prior to the arrival of the coroner. Is that correct?
Under most circumstances, there are times when the investigator may request that the detective assist perhaps in moving a body.
All right, and you, of course, never touched the body, right? Before the coroner arrived?
Before the coroner arrives, no, I don't believe I did.
And in this particular case, I'm talking about this case.
Yes.
And as far as you know, Detectives Van Adder, Phillips, nor Furman touched the body either. Is that correct?
I never saw them touch the body.
All right. Are you aware that Officer Risky, the first patrolman on the scene, touched Mr. Goldman's body? Are you aware of that?
Only through the testimony of Officer Risky.
And where'd you see that testimony, hear that testimony?
I heard that testimony.
Where'd you hear it?
Where?
Were you here?
I was observing it on television.
So you're watching television?
Yes.
And you remember he said he went around and touched Mr. Goldman's face, I guess, in the area of the eye?
I thought it was the eyeball, maybe
The eyeball.
mistaken. Yes.
All right. And other than that, do you know of anyone who touched these particular bodies?
Prior to the arrival of the coroner, I don't believe I saw anyone do that.
Now, yesterday you shared with us your belief that there was no lividity in the body of Nicole Brown Simpson while at the scene, and you recall that testimony?
I believe I testified I didn't observe any. There didn't appear to be any lividity.
All right, can you tell the court and jury what is lividity?
Lividity is a sinking of the blood in the body after death to the lowest point of the body, and this is caused by a gravitational pull. Post-mortem lividity will usually become fixed in 3 to 4 hours after death and remain fixed.
And is it your recollection that you saw no lividity in the body of Nicole Brown Simpson?
That's my recollection, yes.
You don't recall that when she was laying on her side that there was a purplish color in her face, that you noticed certain portions of her body that were different colors?
I didn't make any close observation on lividity.
Did you at any time see her body when the black dress she was wearing was in any way pulled up, so it would reveal her body?
I may have.
And do you recall seeing any lividity or any discoloration of the skin at that point?
I don't recall seeing anything that I would call marked lividity.
All right, when you say marked lividity, did you see any lividity at all, sir? As you think about it now, and you can feel free to look at your notes if you have notes in that regard.
I don't recall seeing any lividity. That's not to say that it wasn't there. That's to say that that wasn't something that I particularly looked for.
Now, yesterday you shared with us that you had, that you believe that the coroner's office had taken a liver temperature of Miss Nicole Brown Simpson. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you recorded a number of 82 for us, and you recorded that as about 10:30 to 10:40 a.m. on June 13th. Is that correct?
I believe so.
Now, in order to take a liver temperature, did you see the coroner actually use a scalpel to actually take the liver temperature in this case? Did you see that?
That's the method that's normally employed by them, yes.
All right, and so that we're clear about that, the method is that the liver is somewhere under the diaphragm, under the rib cage. Isn't that correct?
A little lower than that, but yes.
And in order to take this liver temperature, they have to make an incision, put a hole in there, and they take the temperature that way. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, were you present when this happened? For either one of the bodies?
I was present for Mr. Goldman. As far as Mrs. Simpson, I believe that was done in the van, so
All right.
I didn't actually observe that.
All right, so with regard to Mrs. Simpson, and you were told by somebody this was done, or you were just told the results?
No, it's my recollection. I believe I requested of the investigator to do a liver temp. I don't believe it was done immediately when the body was removed.
And so that we're clear, why did you want to have a liver temperature done, sir?
It could be an indicator to assist one in establishing an approximate time of death.
In fact, in your 20 years of experience, you've almost always tried to get the liver temperature where possible, where you're on the scene within a reasonable time after what you believe is the time of death. Isn't that correct?
It would depend on the appearance of the body. As an example, one wouldn't want to necessarily do that if you had a decomposed body or a bloated body.
I understand that.
Under most circumstances, if you can get a liver temperature, then that's what you want to do.
All right, so that's a normal thing under most circumstances. And in this instance, with regard to Ms. Nicole Brown Simpson, you were not present, and do you know how the liver temperature was actually taken? Do you know that for a fact?
Again, I don't recall observing it myself.
All right. Now, a couple days later, on the 14th or thereabouts, or a day or so later, you attended an autopsy in this matter, did you not?
Yes,
And so you were present when these bodies were autopsied, isn't that correct?
that's correct.
And at that time, did you see any kind of a round hole in the body at about the place where the liver would be? You remember? On Miss Nicole Brown Simpson?
I wouldn't have looked for one, so I don't recall seeing one.
So you don't recall one way or the other, right?
That's correct.
So at any rate, without seeing this, you were advised that the liver temperature was 82 by the coroner's investigator, Mr. Ratcliffe. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, with regard to Mr. Goldman, you've described for us that after, let me see if I understand the sequence of events, some sheets were placed down under these bodies. Is that correct?
No. There was a plastic sheet placed out on the walkway,
All right.
and the bodies were moved onto the plastic sheet where they were examined for such things as a rigor mortis and liver temperature and these types of things.
All right. And after the examination was concluded with regard to Miss Nicole Brown Simpson, was the sheet left there and the body was taken away?
No, the plastic sheet that she was on remained with her. She was
All right.
wrapped in that sheet.
Was there some other kind of sheet left there under the plastic sheet after the body was taken away?
There was a light cotton blanket that was there, yes.
All right. And that light cotton blanket had been put down at what time, if you recall?
I don't recall. It would have to have been sometime around 7:30 a.m. perhaps.
All right. After you'd come back from the Rockingham residence, right?
Yes.
Now, and then after Miss Nicole Brown Simpson's body had been moved, then Mr. Goldman's body was lifted and put somewhere in that area, somewhere near where her body had been. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
And was a plastic sheet put around his body also?
The plastic sheet was laid down first on the walkway, and he was placed on top of the sheet.
Did you at all assist the coroner's representatives in moving that body out of this very small area we described yesterday over onto the sheet, Mr. Goldman's body?
I don't recall if I assisted them or not. I don't believe so because of the confined space.
The small space.
I may have assisted in some slight way, but I don't recall.
All right. Now, with regard to Mr. Goldman, now, were you present when the liver temperature was taken?
Yes.
And what, if anything, did you see the coroner do in taking his liver temperature?
My recollection is it was taken in the conventional way.
And by that, what do you mean by conventional way?
There was a cut made around the area, and the thermometer was inserted, to the best of my recollection.
And as you sit here now, can you visualize that? That having actually happened? Think back.
I recall seeing I was doing several things while this was going on. I was aware that it was going on. My only vivid recollection is of the thermometer in the body.
All right, do you recall seeing the thermometer stuck in the body?
I recall seeing it in there, yes.
Okay, and what was the liver temperature of Mr. Goldman that you received?
I believe that was also, I'm
If you
sorry?
need your notes at any point, let us know.
Okay. I believe that was also 82 degrees,
82 degrees?
yes.
And the ambient temperature was about the same as you told us yesterday?
Yes, 70 degrees,
So it was 70 degrees to June 13th, is that correct?
yes.
By the way, did you ever have occasion in the course of your investigation to determine the ambient temperature at about between 11 and 12 o'clock p.m. on June 12th?
I may well have. I requested various records from I believe, the National Weather Bureau, and without checking those, I couldn't tell you just how far they went back.
Well, do you have some notes that will refresh your recollection in that regard?
I have the Weather Service report.
All right, can you get that for us, or can we get that for you?
Fine.
All right, well, where do we look?
Well, it might take a moment here.
All right, well, if the court will allow, I would ask.
Certainly.
Thank you.
I have in front of me the U.S. Department of Commerce report. Consisting of several pages, dated August 10th, 1994. I also have a National Weather Service report dated June 12th, 1994. There are quite a few figures on here. It may take a moment to, is that 11 p.m.?
Yeah, between 11 and 12 midnight on June 12th.
You need a straight edge, Detective Lange?
Well, I think I have it here, Your Honor. It appears that at 23:51, which would be 11:51 p.m., temperature was 64 degrees.
Can you compare that with this other gauge you have from the U.S. Department of Commerce, sir? 11, 20.
Detective Lange, you're losing your microphone there. There you go.
Santa Monica station on the other report states that at 11:46 p.m. it was 66 degrees.
And the first one that you read, is that for Los Angeles or Santa Monica or Brentwood?
I believe it's LAX, but I'd have to double check here.
All right. So I think that, so can we, and you were around that morning, having gotten up and come from your home, so would you believe that the temperature was probably somewhere between 64 to 66, somewhere between, say, 11 and midnight on June 12th? That'd be a fair statement?
I'd say that was fair, yes.
All right. Now, so with regard to Mr. Goldman's body, you were then given this 82 liver temperature, and you knew the ambient temperature was 70, and then his body was then moved from the location. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so that we're clear, these bodies were moved from the Bundy location by the coroner's representatives about what time on June 13th, 1994?
Approximately 10:30 or 10:40 a.m.,
All right. Now,
perhaps a little before that.
Now, with regard to Mr. Goldman's shoes, can you describe for the jury the kind of shoes he was wearing?
I would call them cloth-type athletic boots. They were, the bodies were rubber, appeared to be rubber. They appeared to be some type of athletic boots. And if I recall correctly, there was a cloth upper part that went all the way to mid-calf, perhaps.
And they had some kind of a patterned sole, is that correct?
I believe so.
Now, in the course of your investigation, you had occasion, did you not, to try and determine whether or not you saw the pattern that was displayed on Mr. Goldman's shoes, whether or not you saw that pattern in any of that blood, whether you had any bloody footprints from his shoes. You checked that, didn't you?
I may have.
All right, and you didn't find any pattern that matched Mr. Goldman's shoes in any of that blood there that day, did you?
If I had, I would have noted it.
And you didn't find, did you?
No.
So as far as the facts that evening, we know you weren't there, so we have to theorize about certain things. Is that a fair statement? Well, that's preliminary, Your Honor. Thank
You
you.
can answer the question.
I generally would not theorize. I would go with the evidence.
All right, but I'm saying with regard to who was killed first, you were not there, were you?
That's correct.
All right. So if you speculate as to something, that's a theory, isn't it?
As far as who was killed first,
Yes.
it would be speculation because I might have 2 or 3 versions of what could have happened due to the evidence.
Right. In the final analysis, there's only one body that'll make that determination in this case, isn't that right? And that's the 12 people over there, isn't that correct?
Same. That's argumented.
Argument?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Now, so that we're clear, the patterns on Mr. Goldman's shoes, you did not find those patterns in any of that blood, which was very plentiful there at the scene at Bundy. Isn't that correct?
There was plenty of blood, yes.
Right. And you did not find the pattern of those shoes, right?
That's correct.
And if I were to show you, so that we're clear, I'd like to mark an exhibit, Counsel.
2-8.
I'd like, Your Honor, to, what is our next one?
10-28.
1028. I've shown this to counsel. May I approach the witness?
You may.
I have what purports to be a white patterned athletic shoe. And I'd like to place this before Detective Lange and ask him, does that appear to you to be a fair portrayal of the bottom of Mr. Goldman's shoe? Does it appear that when at the coroner's office there where the picture was allegedly taken?
I don't believe this was taken at the coroner's office, sir.
Well, wherever it was taken.
This appears to be taken at the crime scene.
Okay.
Yes, that appears to be Mr. Goldman's right foot, the bottom of the shoe.
All right. And do you want to check any notes to make sure that you did not see or find that pattern anywhere? Are you pretty sure about that?
I don't recall seeing that pattern.
All right.
I have several pages of notes. I could review them, I suppose, but I don't recall seeing that pattern.
And if during the break, if you change your mind on that or change your testimony, you can let us know.
Certainly will.
All right. Now, with regard to and this picture here, 1028, was, as best you can tell, taken at the scene. Is that correct?
Yes.
And there's a person dressed in blue who has a glove on. Do you recall seeing one of the coroner's representatives with a glove on
Yes.
that morning?
Yes.
Were you able to determine whether or not the coroners in moving the body got or touched Mr. Goldman's shoes with the blood that was there? You recall that?
I'm not sure I'm clear on your question.
As they, at any point when you were at the scene, when the coroner's representatives moved Mr. Goldman's body from one location to the other, did you see them have his shoes come in contact with any of that blood that was there on the sidewalk and around?
I don't recall ever seeing the shoes come in contact with any blood.
You did at some point see stains on the shoes, did you not? Blood stains?
Yes.
Both on the top of the shoes and kind of under into the side of the shoes, isn't that correct?
I believe so.
Have just a second, Your Honor. Thank you, Your Honor. Sorry. While at the scene, dear, did you ever instruct the coroner's representatives to bag the hands of both Mr. Simpson and Mrs. Simpson and Mr. Goldman?
No.
And what is the procedure of bagging hands regarding decedents?
If there appears to be perhaps evidence on the hands, or if there was perhaps a firearm involved, the coroner's investigator may in fact want to bag the hands.
All right.
I don't recall seeing that in this case.
You don't recall that seeing it?
No.
And if there were evidence, let's say under Miss Nicole Brown Simpson's fingernails, bagging the hands would help preserve any trace evidence that might be under her fingernails or on her hands. Isn't that a fair statement? Yes.
You can answer.
Isn't that correct?
Again, that would be speculative on my part.
Well, let's see now. You're a homicide detective of over 20 years' experience, right? Well, that's foundational.
It's a statement.
And
The way it's phrased,
all right,
it's
well,
argumentative.
let me say, you're a homicide detective of 20 years' experience, aren't you?
Yes.
And in that connection, you have seen hands bagged before, isn't that correct?
Yes, I have.
And if you knew there were trace evidence under the fingernails of Miss Nicole Brown Simpson, wouldn't you want to try and preserve that?
I believe that was preserved without the bags is what I'm getting at.
The question is, wouldn't you want to try and preserve that?
Overruled.
Certainly.
And wouldn't the best way to preserve that so it wouldn't become degraded or contaminated in any way would be to put bags over the hands so they would be protected for later analysis? Isn't that correct?
Well, that's one way. There are other ways.
All right, what are the other ways?
To wrap the body in plastic and preserve the whole body?
All right, did the coroner's office do that in this case?
Yes.
They wrapped the body in plastic, both bodies?
The bodies were wrapped in a plastic sheet initially, yes.
But when you wrap the body in plastic sheets, don't you then wrap all of the clothes and any trace evidence on the clothes is all wrapped up and brought together? Isn't that another downside of that?
No, that's exactly the purpose in doing that, to keep everything together.
I see. So in this case, you're saying to us that a viable alternative to bagging the hands is to wrap these bodies in plastic?
I'm not necessarily saying that. I'm saying that there are other ways of doing things.
All right. But certainly bagging the hands would
Mr.
be...
Cochran, you need to let him finish his answer.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm sorry. Excuse me, Your Honor. Did
I
you
was
finish?
just going to add that this is common, very common in gunshot cases, where perhaps you want to preserve the hands to take gunshot residue examinations on the hands.
All right. Well, in this case, we didn't have gunshots. So what I'd like to ask you is that one of the ways of preserving trace evidence under fingernails and on the hands would have been to bag the hands. Is that right?
I suppose one could say that.
And that was not done, was it?
I don't believe it was.
For either Ms. Simpson or Mr. Goldman, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, yesterday you had told us, in your discussion of rigor mortis, you gave us, I believe, a description of what you believed rigor mortis to be. And I believe you told us that you believed it was coagulation of proteins in the blood. Remember saying that yesterday?
I believe it's a stiffening of the muscles in the body after death caused by a coagulation of the blood in the muscles.
All right. Is it not true that the rigor mortis is caused by the coagulation of proteins in muscle and not proteins in the blood? It's the coagulation of proteins in the muscle. Is that
Blood.
correct? Isn't that correct?
Blood and blood that would be in the muscle tissue.
In the muscle
yes.
tissue,
Yes.
right? All right. Did you notice any kind of purplish color to Miss Nicole Brown Simpson's face as she laid at the scene there?
I don't recall any purplish color.
You don't recall that?
No.
Now, with regard to Mr. Goldman, because of the struggle he was involved in, wasn't there an indication to you as a seasoned homicide investigator that you'd want to preserve any possible trace evidence under his fingernails also?
That would be a consideration, yes.
And did you think about that morning? That morning?
Certainly.
And did you then instruct the coroner to bag the hands?
No.
Now, with regard to the coroner, we know that the coroner, his representatives got there at 9:10 and about 9:20. Is that correct?
Approximately, yes.
At what point did you instruct or did you call for the criminalist to come to the scene?
I did not specifically request the criminalist to the scene. The criminalist had been originally dispatched to the Rockingham location, and it was my understanding that when the criminalist was through at Rockingham, they would proceed to Bundy.
Let me see if I understand this. The criminalists in this case went to Rockingham first before they came to the Bundy crime scene?
That's correct.
Who called them to come to the Rockingham crime scene, Rockingham scene?
I believe that was done by my partner,
And what was your partner's name?
Van Etter.
All right, now, so there's no confusion. As between you and Van Etter, with regard to time and grade as a homicide detective, is he senior to you?
Not as a homicide detective. Time and grade and rank, he's perhaps 3 months senior to me in rank.
All right, so he outranked you at the scene there?
That's not really the way it works.
Well, I'm just asking you from a standpoint of time and grade in this position, first of all.
As far as our rank structure, yes, by 3 months.
All right, by 3 months.
He was
Okay.
promoted 3 months before I was.
Okay. Now, so the jury's clear, though. as between you and Van Adder, who was in charge of this investigation on the early morning hours of June 12th, June 13th, actually?
It's a responsibility that would be shared by both partners.
So you were co-leaders?
That's correct.
You both had equal responsibility?
Initially, at a crime scene, that's the way it starts out. It depends. All crime scenes are different.
All right, so let's talk about this particular crime scene. When this case started out, he arrived first, is that correct?
Yes.
He was senior in grade, right?
Yes.
And that will never change. Those things will never change, will they?
No.
All right, and with regard to how the investigation of this case has continued, have you continued as co-lead investigators in this case
Yes.
to this day?
Well, the roles have somewhat changed around a bit, but basically that's what we do. We work as partners.
All right. And you have worked as partners for how long?
With Van Adder?
Yes, with Van Adder.
I want to say as a regular partner, approximately 4 to 5 years.
All right. Now, what time did the criminalists arrive at the Rockingham scene, if you know, that morning, June 13th?
I believe it was approximately 10 a.m.
And that's at Rockingham?
I'm sorry. I wasn't at Rockingham when the criminalists arrived.
Okay, so you know what time they got there. Would the log, would a review of the log assist you in that regard, refresh your recollection?
Certainly.
Placing before the witness, Your Honor, Defendant's Exhibit number 10006, and I'll ask him to read it to himself and see whether or not a review of that document will refresh his recollection regarding what time the criminalists arrived at the Rockingham scene.
I believe this is the Bundy log you have here, sir.
All right, this is the Bundy log?
Yes.
There's a Rockingham log?
I'm not aware of one.
All right, so you've never seen a Rockingham log?
I'm not aware of one.
Do you have any notes that will refresh your recollection with regard to what time they arrived there?
I wasn't there,
All right.
so I wouldn't.
Well, let's trace back. You arrived at Rockingham at about 5 a.m. in the morning?
I believe it was approximately 5:05 a.m.
All right, and you left about 6:35, 6:45 in the morning?
About 6:45, yes.
And when you left at 6:45, they had not arrived?
The criminalists
Criminalists.
had not arrived, correct?
Had they been summoned at that point?
I believe it was about the time I left that I was told a criminalist was going to come by the location to do a presumptive test on the vehicle and then proceed to Bundy right after that.
All right, and who told you that?
I believe it was Van Adder.
All right, and Van Adder remained at the Rockingham location, is that correct?
Yes,
When you went back over to Bundy?
correct.
All right, so it was sometime after 6:45 in the morning that they arrived, is that correct? At Rockingham?
That would be my assumption,
All
yes.
right. And since you weren't there, you don't know the exact time. But we know that they arrived at the Bundy crime scene at what time?
I believe that was approximately 10 a.m.
And the bodies were still there at that point, is that correct?
Yes,
And when the criminalists arrived, let's give these criminalists some names. You saw Mazzola, did you not?
yes,
And you saw Fung. You saw two of them, is that correct?
yes.
And when they arrived at the Bundy crime scene, did you give them some instructions?
Not immediately, but shortly thereafter, yes.
And as you had done with Ratcliffe, the coroner's investigator, you took Ratcliffe around the scene and advised her of what you had there and what you'd found. Isn't that correct?
At the locations of the bodies and just subsequently in the house in the upper bedroom, yes.
All right. And with regard to the arrival of the criminalists, did you take them around and show them what you had there?
Yes.
And it's important, is it not, Detective, for you to collect appropriately evidence as soon as possible so it can be subjected to analysis as soon as possible? That's appropriate, is it not?
Well, it would be preferable, but that doesn't always happen.
Well, I understand that. Let's talk about it being preferable. You would always prefer to have the evidence collected as soon as you see it or as soon as possible, isn't that correct?
Again, you would prefer that, but it doesn't happen that way.
Well, let me ask you this. You said in your testimony you saw some blood spots on the rear gate there at Bundy on June 13th, 1994. Is that correct?
Yes,
Those spots have been pointed out to you by Detective Phillips?
that's correct.
You in turn pointed them out to Mr. Fung?
That's correct.
Did you direct Mr. Fung to collect those particular blood spots?
I directed him to do that, and I believe I mentioned to check the entire gate.
All right. And you expected that to be done, isn't that correct?
Yes.
Now, it was not done on June 13th, was it?
No,
In fact, it wasn't done on June 14th, was it?
that's correct.
And neither the 15th.
That's correct.
In fact, it was not done until July 3rd, some 3 weeks later, is that right?
That's correct.
So did Fung come back out there on July 3rd, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, you're aware that this crime scene at Bundy had been washed down at some point on June 13th and June 14th, isn't that correct?
I'm aware that the front walkway was washed down.
All right, and what date was that?
I don't know. I assumed it was a day or two after the crime scene was struck.
Would it be safe in saying it was washed down at least by the 14th of June, sir? That'd be safe?
I don't know.
So a day of two, June 13th, would be the 14th or 15th, right?
I just assumed that. I don't know exactly when it was washed down.
All right. Certainly the crime scene itself was broken down by 3 o'clock or so in the afternoon on the 13th, isn't that correct?
That's correct.
You read the log yesterday, right?
Correct.
All right, and that meant that people were free to go and come with regard to those premises, is that correct?
No.
That meant that the police department had finished their business at that location, isn't that correct, sir?
No.
Sir, if you had known that Fung had not collected and sought to preserve any blood spots that were allegedly on this back fence, you would not have released that crime scene, would you have?
No, I wouldn't have.
You wouldn't have, would you?
No.
Okay, but it was released on the 13th, isn't that correct?
No, it was not released to the public.
Well, let's see now, was the crime scene released on the 13th, sir?
Objection is last and answer.
Overruled.
The crime scene was secured. The residence was secured. The gates were locked.
Was the crime scene released on the 13th, Detective Lange?
We completed our initial crime scene investigation on the 13th. Yes, but I got the inference that you were trying to say it was open to the public, and that's not the case.
No, you shouldn't try to get any inferences from my questions.
Oh, I apologize.
Okay, please, don't get any inferences. Just, let me approach and ask you. I want you to read what you read to Ms. Clark yesterday. What time was that crime scene released?
Objection, Objection, Your Honor. This is misleading.
352.
Yes, Your Honor.
I believe
Overruled.
the last entry, it's kind of written over. It appears to be 15:45, perhaps.
15:45 on June 13th is what time?
3:45 p.m.
In the afternoon, right?
Yes,
That's mean you took those tapes that had been around that scene down at that point, is that correct?
the officers did, yes.
And between that time, 3:45 on June 13th, and July 3rd, 1994, did you ever go back out to the scene between those dates?
I believe I did.
What date did you go back?
I believe I was there on June 23rd.
All right. right, so there was a 10-day period between the time you were on the 13th and the time you came back on the 23rd?
That would be 10 days, but I'm not clear on whether I might have gone back in between those two dates.
Do you have some notes that'll help you in that regard?
Yes,
Can you look at them?
certainly. My notes indicate I was at the location on June 16th, but I didn't enter the premises. I just did a mileage check from the location.
Can I ask you a question while you were there on June 16th? Did you notice
Certainly.
that the blood had been washed down?
No.
You don't recall? Or you didn't
If
notice?
the blood had been washed down on the front walkway?
Yes.
I don't recall making that observation.
All right.
It's not to say that it hadn't been done.
Okay.
My notes do indicate I was there on June 23rd at 10:15 a.m.
All right. And were you there after June 23rd, before July 3rd? Were you there on July 3rd, by the way?
Yes, I was.
All right. Were there any visits between the 23rd of June and July 3rd?
There was a visit on June 27th.
All right. Were there any other visits?
No.
All right. So you've told us all the visits. Is that correct?
As reflected by my notes, those are the only ones I have here.
All right. But despite all those visits, this blood that was allegedly on this back gate was not collected on any of those dates that you came there on. 17th, the 23rd, the 27th. Is that correct? It was not collected, was it?
I believe it was the 16th, but
16th.
that's correct.
And it was finally collected on July 3rd, 1994. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And what time of day was that?
I believe it was in the morning,
Were you present?
approximately 10 a.m. Yes.
Now, with regard to blood spots and blood drops, you can't tell the date that blood was placed there, can you?
You can't really tell the age, no.
All right, and I'm going to show you a photograph of Mr. Fung. This, counsel, is Defendant's 1007. This is a photograph, D-1007, Your Honor, and I want to place it before the detective at this point. Who's depicted in that photograph, sir?
It's criminalist Fung.
And he's pointing to a gate. Is that the rear gate at Bundy?
Yes.
And what date was that photograph taken, if you know?
That would be on July 3rd.
So this was the photograph of July 3rd, 1994, and Fung was pointing toward the fence. Is that right?
That's correct.
All right, may I put this on the
You may.
normal here? 10D-10007.
Mr. Harris, do you have the shield? Thank you.
All right, can you see that on the monitor?
Yes.
And that's a photograph of Dennis Fung, the criminalist, taken on July 3rd, 1994. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you were out there at that location?
Yes.
Now, you're aware that after the crime scene perimeter was taken down by Officers Jones and Paradigm, P-E-R-R-I-D-I-N-E. They had a number of looky-loos and others, tourists from around the world who came in and around that location. Isn't that correct?
Yes,
You're aware of that, aren't you?
yes,
And you also know that some people place flowers on the walkway and at various places around the Bundy location. You're aware of that also, aren't you?
yes.
By the way, when did you first learn that no blood was taken from samples allegedly taken from the back gate? When did you first learn that?
On that day, July 3rd.
You were not aware of it on all those other visits, is that correct?
That's correct.
And with regard to that location, may I have just a second, Your Honor?
Yes.